This is Radio TV Phono Nut, and we have an Emerson portable radio that operates on either AC or batteries. This is probably from about 1941 or so. The case is in relatively good shape to be as old as it is. However, when I got this originally, it wasn't packed very well, and as you can see, got a little mess up right here, probably from where the radio took a hard hit on that corner and it tried to separate the cabinet there and dinged up the covering in the process. The grill here is made of tinite, and as you can see, it's a little deformed, but I've seen a whole heck of a lot worse. In fact, I've got an Emerson record player from the same time period as this radio that had such a grill that was so totally deformed that I just removed it all together and put a metal grill off of a junk school record player on it. Alright, turning it around and looking at the back, we have our little door here where the AC power cord storage is, but the little latch that holds it on is broken off, and we'll have to fix that. Now, what's the model number of this radio? Okay, this is a model FU427. Oh, okay. So I think I'm going to call this one the Brandon radio, and the reason I'll call it the Brandon radio is, well, we can just rename Brandon, start calling Brandon 427, and you get the rest of the idea without me going any further there. So I think now I'll start referring to Brandon as 427, and you know, that'll be a good number for him. Here we are with the back cover removed, and I see the presence of a 6-tube chassis and a 3-gang tuning condenser, which is indicative that this set has a tuned RF stage, which means it should be an ultra hot DXer. Also, this appears to be one of those sets that uses dual output tubes, 1.5 volt low powered output tube for when the set is used on batteries, and then when the set is used on AC, we switch in a standard output tube, which in this case I believe also has the rectifier built in it for more power and better tonal quality. And this power cord is obviously not the original. I see where someone used a polarized cord and then they filed down the wide blade so they could plug the cord into this outlet here. Well, maybe they didn't file it down enough, but generally the way you switch these types of sets to battery operation is you plug the insert the power plug into a slot, in this case right here, which activates a changeover switch to switch it from AC to battery. I kind of get nervous when I see newer power cords installed on old equipment, because it makes me wonder, what did they do under the chassis? Did they just put a power cord on it and let it go? Did they do a good job at replacing the power cord? Did they do a sloppy job? Did they recap the chassis while they were under here? And if they did, was it a good recap, or did they do a sloppy job? It's going to require a lot of effort on my part to clean up the mess. Well, let's get the chassis out and find out what they did. Well, the top side of the chassis looks pretty clean and decent, and we know of at least 3 capacitors that were not changed, 2 there on the top and 1 under the chassis that we can see through the top. And yes, this does use the type of tube I suspected, a type 117N7, which is a rectifier tube and audio output tube. It was used in a lot of little early one-tube wonder phonographs for the rectifier and output tube, and then used in portable radios such as this. It's a good idea. You know, you can run it off of AC and get the same tonal quality and volume level that you would get with an AC operated set, but of course when you run it on batteries, it switches this particular output tube here in place, and you don't get quite as much power or quite as good a tonal quality there. Okay, the moment of truth. Let's flip it up and see what's been done under the chassis here. I see what someone has done here. It looks like they hacked in a filter capacitor, and looks like they hacked in a power cord too. See all the taped up, spliced up crap, and we got some rubber wire that's coming apart. So yeah, whoever worked on this needs to stay out of a radio. This is the kind of thing that I see all too often, and it's not proper. They'll splice on the new power cord to the existing rotten stubby ends of the old power cord, and for obvious reasons that's not a good idea. And then we have this, looks like a later production filter capacitor that somebody hacked in here. Well, maybe not that later production. It's an old can cap that somebody wrapped up with electrical tape to try to insulate it from touching these connections under here. So that, of course, will have to be dealt with. And I'm sure whoever did this called themselves restoring this radio, and it's hack job crap like this is why I tell people never plug in an old radio, even if it looks like it has a newer cord on it. Just because it has a newer AC power cord doesn't mean that the chassis received the proper treatment. So let's get this to the workbench, and then we will do some investigation, bring this thing up carefully and see what it does as it is, and then go from there. And here we are at the workbench, looking probably neater than you've seen it in years, maybe ever. And we did a few changes here since the last time you saw it. We'll go over some of that real quick. We have our Heathkit low voltage power supply. We mainly use this for testing out transistor radios and old tube-based car radios, since this one has a high current capacity. Then we still have our Heathkit variable isolated AC power supply. We have our ICO VTVM. Now that cabinet's just got miscellaneous junk in it. That's our battery eliminator that I built as a kit from Antique Electronics Supply years ago, and it's looking a little ragged from me banging it around. I'm going to redo that one day and mount it in a cabinet. And then we have our ICO resistor and Heathkit capacitor substitution boxes. I need to find the knob that fell off of that. And then our B&K oscilloscope. And then moving up the ladder, we have our Syncor TVA 92 TV video analyzer. You've never seen that before. Put that in place of the old Syncor analyzer that I had here, and I've got the probes to this. I just got to find where I put them. And then we have our old Beckman function generator. And then we have our battery operated Heathkit signal tracer and Heathkit RF generator. And then we have an old benchtop Radio Shack multimeter that I need to work on. It was one that someone gave me several years ago, and I used it for a while, and it just stopped working one day. And back there we have a couple of old battery eliminators for powering farm radios. And then we have our ICO signal tracer and triplet RF signal generator, and our Heathkit old school capacitor tester. So, and I've got even more old test equipment that we're gonna redo and put into use. In fact, some of this I need to go over, but at least it makes a nice appearance as it is. This tone arm back here is an old Japanese Gray Research clone, viscous damped arm like what they used at the radio stations. And a little Westinghouse clock radio that someone gave me several years ago, and I fixed it and got the radio working. I need to fix the clock. But anyway, let's get to the Emerson radio and fire it up and see if we can get some action out of it. And of course our CCTV video magnifier that I often have to use down here. Starting out at about the halfway mark on our AC input, drawing very little current, which is good. And our rectifier / audio output tube is warming up. With these low voltage battery tubes, you're not going to really see the filament on those. In a totally darkened room, you might possibly see a little glow, but generally speaking, you can't see those when they're lit up. Alright, I'm up to 120 volts, and as you can hear, there's noise from the speaker. And it plays. Very distorted at higher volume levels. That's probably due to a bad coupling capacitor.
College football's too pale. It's just look different, and that's kind of my take.
Under his dad's body. This poor little boy asking his mommy and daddy okay.
But yeah, it does play, but it's obvious whoever worked on this only did enough to get it back going again, so we're going to have to go through this and do it properly. And then once we do that, then we ought to have us a nice portable Emerson radio here. But as far as this Syncor analyzer, I also have the Syncor scope that goes with it. It's probably going to end up taking the place of this B&K scope. And I have another companion piece, an analyzer that goes with this, as well as a Syncor PowerRight variable AC power supply and isolation transformer that I need to fix, because one day whenever I was using it, it just went dead, and I never really got in any hurry about fixing it since I have the Heath kit here. But I got the Syncor stuff from a friend of mine who had a TV shop out of his house, and I think he went out of business in around 2000 or 2001. He saw the proverbial writing on the wall, and he knew that there just really wasn't any money in TV repair anymore. I think he bought all of the Syncor stuff in the early 90s, and I believe he paid around 10 grand for all of it. That Syncor stuff was terribly expensive, and when he closed his shop, he tried to give it all to me, and I turned it down because in clear conscience I just couldn't take the stuff for free, knowing what he had paid for it just a few years earlier. Well, I think he hung on to it for several years, and he had a capacitor analyzer in the mix too, but I think he ended up giving that to somebody else. And then one day he asked me if I wanted this stuff. He said, "I'm not going to use it. You're the only person I know who would use it, so I'd just like for you just to take the stuff." So I finally said okay, and here we are. And then we have our ESR meter that we use for testing electrolytic capacitors. That's just only one test for electrolytic capacitors. There are several. And then we have this handheld capacitance meter, and then of course my digital multimeter. And like I said before, we have other test equipment, VTVM, signal tracers, signal generators, and some other stuff that I want to get fixed up and put in the mix, but that'll have to come later. And it just so happens that the radio is covered in the 1942 edition of the Most Often Needed Radio Diagram series. That publication was around until 1969, when by that time the cost of new radios had gotten so cheap that it just really wasn't economical to repair them anymore. And our Emerson radio was in here. Had to get that piece of dust off my lens. Okay, yes, I'm aware that I could get all of these off of the internet, but I like to keep printed copies of these books, these and the Riders, and I need to obtain some more Rider volumes. It's nice to have the actual hard copies on hand for a number of reasons. Number one, the scans that are often provided online are not the clearest in the world, and I know you can't look a gift horse in the mouth, but still, when they're so poorly done that you can't really get much out of them, and there's no point in having them. Number two, what if I get tired of paying the internet bill every month and no longer have access to the schematics? Well, that's when the hard copies will come in handy. And that also coincides with the situation right now where the ink cartridge is out in the printer and I refuse to pay what they want for a replacement ink cartridge. So here we go. Okay, we got the power cord cleaned up. I had to put a little piece of heat shrink tubing over the end of the power cord because this is that kind of insulation that if it gets the least bit hot, it starts melting. So I had to put a little piece of shrink tubing on there to kind of prevent that from happening. But we had the power cord replaced, and we went ahead and replaced the across the line capacitor while we were here. Now we'll get a good look at this filter capacitor slop job. We are going to have to replace this wiring here because it's all crumbly, as you can tell here. And I don't know why they just didn't wrap the whole capacitor with black tape. I guess their roll must have been running out, so they couldn't wrap the whole thing up. But yeah, we're going to have to get this out and probably put a terminal strip right here and put 3 new capacitors on a terminal strip, change out this rotten wiring that go to the capacitors, and that'll make it look a lot neater. Yeah, this particular wire here must have been really crumbly because they ran a big piece of oversized sleeving over that one. Well, I don't know when this was done, but I can tell by the type of electrical tape used that it wasn't done too many decades ago. At least they did use quality parts, sprayed capacitors, although these are probably just something that was laying in somebody's junk box. Okay, we need a dual 20 for the B plus and a 40 for the filament supply. Let's see, what did they put in here? They put a 50-30 in here for the B plus and a 250 for the filament supply. Although that's really not that critical in this situation. I'm way more concerned about the sloppy repair work than I am the usage of overvalued parts here. Okay, in removing everything, I've determined that this filter cap replacement here wasn't this radio's first filter cap replacement. I found remnants of old wire cut off up close to the terminals where this thing had another filter capacitor at some point in its life. And then when that one went bad, most likely it was a multi-section cardboard tube. Somebody just snipped the wires off close to the cardboard tube body of the old filter capacitor and stuck this mess in there. Well, now I'm putting a terminal strip here, and we'll put our more modern, smaller capacitors on the terminal strip. And I was getting rid of the old ground wire that was on the chassis. This is a hot chassis set. And these bypass capacitors here, there's 2 of them that are also grounded to chassis. So while I'm doing this, I might as well just go ahead and replace these while we're at it. Okay, we now have our electrolytics in place. And now I want to change these 2 big bypass capacitors out. Okay, I've removed the 0.25 microfarad bypass capacitors. We're replacing them with 0.22 microfarad capacitors, and you can see how much smaller the new ones are. On the old capacitors, you can see the outside foil of the capacitor is indicated by the band here, which connects to the lowest impedance point of the circuit, which in this case happens to be chassis, which is ground. They did that back then to help prevent oscillation and RF interference. And on these newer capacitors, they don't mark the outside foil, and 99 times out of 100 it's really not going to make any difference which way you insert them. But given the nature of this, I went ahead and located the outside foil with my oscilloscope by clipping my oscilloscope across the capacitor and then tightly holding the capacitor in whichever way gave me the most amplitude on the screen. That indicates the outside foil end, which I have bent back here. Like I said, I could probably install it either way, and there's a 99.9% chance that it wouldn't make any difference whatsoever. But just to cover my bases, I'm just going to go ahead and install it like it was originally from the factory, and that way if something does go haywire, I won't be chasing my tail. And look at this .002 job that couples the audio to the from the volume control to the grid of the first audio tube. See how long this lead is on it? Even from the factory they had to add a extra lead length to it because the lead on the original capacitor was not long enough, and they just tack soldered it on to the terminal there on the tube socket, the tie point, which has what looks to be a 10 meg resistor going from there to ground. And then this grid cap lead also ties on to that tie point, and it unfortunately came off too. So this is that capacitor that I should have replaced before I put the terminal strip in place for the filter capacitors. One of these things that I don't particularly like to do, but sometimes it's necessary with this newer capacitor being a good bit shorter than the old capacitor and the lead being shorter on it. I had to splice some existing lead off of one of those junk capacitors onto the new capacitor to where it would reach over to the volume control, and you see how we had to insulate it. I was able to stick wire insulation over the new capacitor lead, but the old lead that I salvaged from another capacitor is just a little bit too thick, and the insulation wasn't sliding over it very easily. So I had to use some heat shrink tubing for that, and then I used some larger diameter heat shrink tubing to cover up the splice here. I admit it doesn't look the best in the world, but you know, it could be a lot worse. You know, thinking about it, I'm glad whoever worked on this thing decided not to do a recap on it, because can you imagine what a mess that would have been to clean up? Alright, we're about to give it a trial run before we replace any more capacitors. I really went further than I wanted to go this time, but some of those capacitors I had to take out to do what I needed to do anyway, so I might as well go ahead and get rid of them. And it appears that we're still working as good as we did, or maybe better, so that's good.
Senate Democrats say they want to boost taxes on sunlight earners, use the money to extend the solvency of Medicare. This is SRN News.
It appears to be less distorted now, and I feel like changing that volume control coupling cap had something to do with that.
We'll be playing the best in positive, inspirational, and Christian country music. You'll hear some of your favorite country artists lifting up Jesus, the one who gives us hope in these uncertain times. Join me from 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. Friday and Saturdays for the Cross Country Show here on WMER, 1390 AM, 93.1 FM, or you can get us on live streaming, WMERworldwide.com. Country music with a Jesus kick.
This is Joanna with Meridian's Good News Gospel Station. Here is your weather forecast on this Thursday evening. As we head into tonight, mostly clear skies and a low of 78 with a light breeze out of the south-southwest around 4 miles per hour. For tomorrow morning, some sun and a temp near 89. In the afternoon and evening, a wind 2 to 5 miles per hour, possible thunderstorms and some clouds, and a high around 94. For Saturday, likely thunderstorms and some sun and a high of 94. I'm Joanna. Stay tuned to Meridian's Good News Gospel Station for your local weather.
Good music and God's people from your hometown Good News Gospel Radio, WMER. Good music and God's people. Everybody singing underneath that steeple. What a wonderful night.
This tuning condenser is very dirty.
So, you guys room every morning. Take them to practice.
3.1 FM, 1390 AM.
Those people were saying our we sell that.
What was the, if y'all could distill it down into one key?
Keep trying. Just keep, some months, I think 3 months in, our dogs got into like 3 pounds of chocolate, and so we had to pay $2,000 at the emergency vet. And so that was really hard. And just keep trying. Like this year, like things are going to happen along the way.
Like I mentioned in other videos, I really don't like to just go in and wholesale recap a radio or any other piece of electronic equipment for that matter, for a couple of different reasons. Number one, what if you go to all that trouble and expense to recap something and find that a major component is bad, like a power transformer, or in the case of a television, the flyback transformer or yoke or vertical output transformer or anything like that, and then you've done all that work for nothing unless you can locate a suitable component. And another reason I don't like doing a wholesale recap is, what if you, let's say, do like what we did and test the radio out when you first get it and it plays but maybe not as good as it should, and then you do a wholesale recap and turn it on, and let's say it doesn't play at all, or it's squealing and squawking and motorboating and doing things that it shouldn't be doing, and then you have no idea where the problem is because you've recapped the whole chassis. It could be, the problem could be anywhere from start to finish. So if you troubleshoot along and do it stage by stage and check as you go, then if a problem crops up, then you'll have a general idea as to where to look for it. Alright, I think this is the plate to grid coupling cap between the first audio and the output tube. Or actually it serves as a coupling cap for both output tubes.
In our house we call it our lag. I'm on commission too.
Volume control needs to be squirted too. Alright, let's see what we have here in the way of DC voltage. Yeah, 6 volts on the grid in respect to ground, so yeah, that capacitor is indeed leaky. No surprise there, and if we let it play for an extended period of time like that, it would gradually damage the output tube, and we don't need to be damaging any tubes. I might not have that tube in stock, probably don't. In fact, it's about gotten to the point where I've used all of the commonly used tubes. Seems like whenever I need a tube these days, I have to order one. Despite the fact I have 5 or 6 tube caddies full of them, but like I said, I've pretty much depleted the most often used ones. What a packed up mess. This is one of those times where I'd be tempted just to J-hook the new capacitor in and be done with it. Okay, there's the plate side of that capacitor. I left the excess on in case I have trouble sleeping tonight over the fact that I J-hooked a capacitor lead in place, and I decide tomorrow when I'm recharged to pull everything loose and do it the proper way, then I can more easily do that. But right now it's not looking that way. Alright. We got more volume now, which is to be expected.
And guess what? They're now on par.
That was they were doing better and they should have been making more money. But Rob, you can't just say, well, we put in just as much.
Law school. When I was trying to go there, it was.
I think the next step is going to be cleaning this tuning condenser.
In Russia have said, look, all of this noise in America about the Britney Griner, you see people going on TV saying, they're like, that's not helping.
When my mind is heavy laden and my burdens keep me pacing, I turn to the one.
Alright, I think this is probably enough for tonight, so we're going to shut everything down and get back on it again later. Okay, it's a new day and I'm back on the Emerson. I replaced a few more capacitors and I decided to take a break from capacitor changing and go ahead and clean this tuning condenser. So I lubricated all the points of interest between the front and the rear, and now I'm cleaning the plates, getting any crap out of between the plates, and then that should make the tuning operate a lot better. Really on this particular radio I don't think there's going to be much of repair diagnosis involved here, since all of the stages appear to be working. It's just a matter of getting rid of the leaky capacitors and changing any resistors that are bad out of tolerance, which I haven't found any yet, and then performing an alignment on it, and then it ought to be good to go.
For you. Yeah, damn right. All day.
Alright, I've got the tuning condenser a little better, but it's still not right. It's cutting out below about 900, so that tells me we have a plate that's shorting, and we also have an intermittent problem where the reception seems to drop out completely, and I can wiggle around on these two tubes and get the reception back. So I'm going to have to go over my work and make sure that I didn't poorly solder something.
Down at the aquarium like a ball of wax. Wax job. Hey, no one said nothing about a... Hey, because he's a Dollar Shave Club for a noticeably smooth shave. Find us in stores and at dollarshaveclub.com.
Okay, we've lost reception again. So what happened? So yeah, well, there actually may be some troubleshooting going on here. Yeah, well, we might have to do a little troubleshooting. Alright, I'm catching some interference from the light whenever I touch the grid of the 1A7. I have an idea what has happened is our local oscillator is intermittent. Usually whenever it sounds like you're going to get reception but you don't, it's generally because the local oscillator isn't working. And I cranked the line voltage up a little bit and it came back, so that may be indicative of a weak oscillator mixer tube.
But Julius Randle now.
I'm just going to keep working this tuning condenser back and forth, and maybe I can work whatever crud is in it out.
He gives you, 28. I'd be fine with that. And I think he averaged 16 last year.
Don't buy the lie, you gotta do it all. Just let Jesus use you.
I just know how you surround him.
If you want to know what Dan Patrick said next, searching the Dan Patrick Show. And as always, you can listen to
So once again, we still have two stations that are owned by different people that have basically the same coverage area, that are running the same afternoon sports programming on both stations. So that just goes to show how uninventive that these radio stations are these days. Just throw whatever they can get up on there the cheapest and let it rip. It don't matter if a competing station is running the same programming.
They were squabbling by year 2.
Well, it's close to 7 o'clock and we have a country station coming in somewhere in the upper half of the dial. Don't know where it's coming from. Fading fast though. WKMG. I'll have to go look that up.
Prime Minister and intended to kill him. A radio.
Morning, you go to school, go to the headmaster, you get some kids out and...
We continue to record 3-year anniversary.
Sounds like another country station.
Items are then given to food banks and pantries. Since the initial...
Mickey's back! To the voters.
It's probably 870 WWL. Yeah, the lower end usually doesn't start popping until after sundown. Yep. But this is pretty impressive considering that we haven't aligned anything yet, and we still have to worry about that intermittent oscillator dropout, or at least that's what I think it is at this time. And I've still got a few more capacitors to replace.
Now
next Sunday ticket destination this fall. For USA Radio News, I'm Tim Berg.
That's probably WDIA 1070 out of Memphis. So this thing's well on its way to being a hot radio. Have to turn the lights off whenever I'm DXing because of the interference. Same goes for my soldering station here. I will say this about Emerson. All these capacitors appear to be factory installed, and all they seem to have done was just stick them through the hole and solder them up. So in other words, all I have to do is heat the solder connection and pull the capacitor out, and in a way that's a good thing when you're already dealing with a chassis that's packed up. Who wants to go to the effort of unbending a mechanical connection that was made to try to get something out of an already cramped up chassis? Okay, who remembers that game Operation back in the 80s? It's where you were supposed to operate on this patient, but you had to be very careful and not let your probe touch the outer area of where you were supposed to be operating on, or you would set off an alarm and cause lights to flash at you. Well, that's the game I felt like I was playing by trying to get my soldering iron tip down in here without accidentally brushing up against the rubber insulation on this power cord or some of these other things down in here. Here's a station that's fading out, but they played what you call, I guess, alternative rock from the 90s. They're on the Mississippi Gulf Coast. They were a country station, a classic country station that branded themselves as the Possum, and then they switched to a format called Casino Radio, where I sarcastically referred to them as a radio station telling people how to gamble. And then they switched to the 1990s alternative rock format. Of course, they have an FM translator.
My son, there's a bedroom. It sounds like we need to relocate somewhere where cost of living is lower.
I've still got one capacitor under the chassis to replace, and these two on the loop antenna. Oh, and by the way, I didn't lose any sleep last night over that one capacitor lead that I J-hooked in place, even though I tried to do it tastefully. I strive to be the type of guy that if somebody dives into this radio 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now, I want them to say that, well, whoever recapped this radio can recap any of mine. I don't want them to say, oh, look at the hack job he made. I wouldn't let him touch nothing of mine. And in all honesty, you should strive to be like the first guy. Be the guy that someone can look at your work and be happy to let you work on anything of theirs. Don't be the guy that the next guy pulls the chassis out and looks at your work and wouldn't let you touch anything of his.
Investments while trying to save for the kids' college.
Okay, I have the lights turned off. Could that be WSM? I don't know. That doesn't look quite low enough, but WSM. Although I guess it is. Yeah. Although the alignment's off on this radio, but that would have to be WSM. That's WSM. Well, this is looking very promising. If we're picking that up when the radio hasn't even been aligned yet, then that's a good sign. I would like to know where that interference is coming from. And usually reception is better in the winter time than the summer.
Today, again, Churchill Mortgage. Of identity. Private. He can be a doubles.
Peak performance for men helps over 80%.
And Devin Booker has 2 cases.
Two-run home run to left field right after.
About 10 after 8, not quite dark yet.
And allowed 1 earned run.
Like I said before, the higher end of the band
so far. Diamond toss on the ticket.
is usually more, is usually better for DX than the lower end of the band, at least in my area.
And Shohei Ohtani has beaten out the Astros' Jordan Alvarez. Term life for you.
And I think 1390 has gotten their act together a little bit. You know, before they were so overmodulated that they were distorted. Well, they are still louder than the other stations, but I think they have got their act together a bit. They sound better now.
I'm Storm Team 11 Chief Meteorologist Dietra McKenzie. You've always trusted us to keep you informed about the weather, and we don't take that trust lightly.
That's why we will always be the first to alert you about the possibility for severe or impactful weather.
And that's what First Alert means. When it comes to bad weather,
and of course, before we're done, we will check this out in battery mode to make sure the audio output stage for the battery side is working. It'll be interesting to compare the sound quality between AC operation and battery. And I do want that to work because there's a good chance that I'm going to rig up a battery pack for this to use it as a portable.
For more tips on preparing for severe weather, proper use of a generator, and other valuable safety information. Don't wait until a storm is headed our way. The time to prepare is now. East Mississippi Electric Power Association.
Tom, official treat of MLB. DQ. Happy tastes good.
The uncertainty in the world is leading to market volatility, my friends.
I guess maybe I should hold off on the band scan until after the radio is completely fixed and aligned. Maybe I should do that, save time.
Legacy PM.
Mostly sunshine and a temp near 91. In the afternoon and evening, a possibility of thunderstorms and some clouds, and a high around 94. For Sunday, likely thunderstorms and light showers, and a high of 90. I'm Joanna. Stay tuned to Meridian's Good News Gospel Station for your local weather.
Hi folks, this is Kayla with the Wise Carvers, and you're listening to WMER Radio, 93.1 FM or 1390 AM, your hometown Good News Gospel Radio in Meridian, Mississippi.
Out of the AM stations we have, this is about the only one that's that I can tolerate. And even at that, you know, I wouldn't want to listen to this all the time. I would like some variety in my life. What I'd like to have, and I know I'm dreaming, is an oldie station here on AM, but given the demographic of my area, I just really don't see that happening.
As well.
Really on the Ken Coleman Show, we can take those calls as well, because again,
but on the other hand, I hear that Praise 910 is doing really well. And you can hear the kind of music they're playing. Now, some black gospel I can tolerate, mainly the older stuff, but this This newer stuff that they put out just doesn't really do a whole lot for me. So I guess we better turn that off before we get a copyright strike. And that you just heard was mild compared to some of what they play on that station. That I could almost tolerate, but some of that that they play, I just can't hang with it. Okay, the final capacitor under the chassis, and another one that I had to J-hook one end of it. The reason being was this one didn't want to come out so easily by melting the solder, and as you can see, there's wires running right up next to that tube socket terminal that could very well be compromised by the heat from the soldering iron, and I'm not really wanting to rewire this chassis. So we have a total of 2 connections so far that have been J-hooked, and of course I had to move this transformer out of the way in order to get to that. Okay, final capacitor installed on the loop antenna. Had to J-hook this one too because the capacitor lead wasn't quite long enough to reach over there. So generally I don't like J-hooking, but sometimes we have to when the lead is not long enough, or when the terminal that it needs to be soldered to is either very inaccessible or there's danger of possible damage to something else if we try to unsolder the part directly from the terminal. So yeah, this concludes the recap. Okay, here's our capacitors, 14 of them, which is an above average capacitor count for just an AM radio, but with a portable radio like this with an extra RF stage and a separate audio output stage for the battery, for our battery operation. You know, there's extra components needed, not to mention all of the bypass capacitors that are needed that might not be necessary in standard AC operated sets for RF bypass use, etc. So just for the fun of it, let's pull down the Heathkit condenser tester and see what kind of shape these are in. We know what they're going to be in, but you know, it'd be fun just to see. Alright, the 0.2, I'm getting an eye opening at about 0.5. I've got the lights off because this tuning eye is getting dim, and it's a little bit hard to see with the lights on. Alright, leakage at 50 volts. Yeah, as you can see, that's pretty bad. And of course, the higher voltage we apply, the more it's going to leak. But in this radio, it's never going to see more than 90 volts anyway. So, but even at 20 volts, or actually this is more like 50 volts, even though the switch is marked for 20. 0.25, number 2. Well, that one's not quite as leaky, but it's pretty bad. 0.25, number 3. Yep, same story. Alright, 0.05, this one's not even giving me a well-defined eye opening here. Oh yeah, I think this is pretty much going to be the same story for all of them. I'll test them, and if any of them check better, then I'll report back. How about that? Here's the 400 picofarad plate bypass capacitor for the first AF and detector tube that connects between the plate and ground, and its purpose is to strip off any RF that might be present at the plate. By that point, all we want is audio frequencies, and you have to use a lower value capacitor. If you went much higher than this, not only would it strip the RF off, it would start stripping your high frequency audio off, and we don't want that. I didn't have a 400 picofarad, but I had a 500 picofarad silver mica, and that works just fine. Alright, let's just see how it tests for leakage. Well, that one might be the best capacitor in the bunch. Does it even read a value? Let's see. Is it open? Yeah, I get a very puny eye opening, and it does leak at 600 volts. Still a bad capacitor, but better than any of the rest of them I've tested out of this radio. It's amazing how bad these capacitors can check, and the radio can still play relatively acceptably well there. Okay, every one of these tested leaky to some degree, some worse than others, but none of them near about to the usable stage. So these will all go in my box full of junk capacitors. I usually keep these around in case I need a scrap piece of lead to extend the lead on a component, or if I should suddenly decide to restuff capacitors and maybe want to fix up some period correct looking ones. I'll have some old ones to do that too. The main time that would come in handy is if I got a hold of a radio that was full of let's say modern orange drop capacitors, or radio lead caps that are not as easy to stuff in something like this, and if I decided that I wanted to make it look period correct, I could restuff some of these with axial lead capacitors and make the radio look more period correct. Now, in 30 some odd years, I haven't been inclined to do it up to this point, and I probably won't ever be inclined to do it, but you never know. I have got a Zenith 6-volt farm radio that's in really nice shape. It looks to be pretty much unmolested. I think the only evidence I saw of repair was one tube being replaced and a mismatched tube shield, but the rest of it looks pretty much virgin. That's the only one that I've even thought about restuffing capacitors, since the originals are branded Zenith. It'd be nice to make that one, keep that one as original looking as possible, since it's already in above average condition.
DuckDuckGo. Privacy.
Alright, we're working.
Podcast takes you.
That's good. The only thing I'm concerned about at this point is the oscillator dropping out. I never have exactly figured out what was causing that. It hasn't done it since. It could have very well been the tuning condenser, and me working it back and forth might have cleaned it up with a combination of what I sprayed in it. I think this is the little country station in Neshoba County, and if that's the case, this is doing pretty good.
IRS tax debt? I owe the IRS $37,000. IRS tax forgiveness programs that may put
Great night's sleep. Clinical studies show the ingredients in GH Boost can...
And he understands.
That's probably the talk station out of Jackson.
Killing it at GNC, but you could only...
And this was an area in which he was, where this temptation occurred, where they were large.
That's probably WCPC out of Houston, Mississippi, a 50,000 watt religious station.
Small and low of
That's 670, the little black gospel station out of Livingston, Alabama. They used to be easier to pick up here. I guess they've probably dialed their power back. That used to be a decent station until the original owner died, and then the son took it over, and pretty much all he saw was dollar signs, and abruptly turned it from a oldie / nostalgia station to a black gospel station. Didn't give the air staff any warning or anything. Just at the end of a broadcast day, just called everybody in, handed them a termination letter and told them that their services were no longer needed. And there were actually hundreds of letters written to the editor of the paper, as well as hundreds of phone calls made to the radio station in protest over what they did. But do you think it did any good? No. And to me, when you have hundreds of listeners throw a stink about a format change, then that tells me that you've ruffled some feathers. Now, most of these other stations could change their formats and nobody would notice, but when you have a station where people actually notice, then you probably did something wrong. And seeing as how we have the black gospel station at 910 now that can easily be heard over in the over into West Alabama, I really don't see how this little station's even staying on the air.
Motivated music to get you through your day and your journey. We play your favorite gospel jams all day, and we also play your favorite old school gospel jams. Praise 95.9 FM, 910 AM is here. Check it out. Praise 95.9 FM, 910 AM is Meridian's only gospel radio station, and we're giving God the praise. We're Meridian's Gospel Connection. Praise 95.9 FM, Praise 910 AM.
Agree, but that's why we love it.
Love your show. I listen to it every day.
The Odd Couple with Chris Broussard and Rob Parker. Weekdays at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific on Fox Sports Radio. There is no...
This tuning condenser still needs some work.
Listen to what the Bible tells us about this in Psalms 20. This is David writing.
Now, Notley, LeVar Arrington, Brady Quinn, Jonas Knock, Chris Broussard, Rob Parker.
Even on Saturday, those two stations still simulcast the same. No, I don't guess you could call it that. They're not owned by the same people. They run the same programming. Two stations owned by different companies that have basically the same coverage area, that feel the need to run the same sports programming, and I'd rather listen to political yap over that.
The Dollar Shave Club 6-blade razor.
Yeah, that's our little country station. So if this radio will pick that up now, it'll probably pick it up a lot better once we perform an alignment on this. Okay, we have the generator tuned to 262 kilocycles, which in this case is the IF frequency of this set. That was a common car radio IF frequency back in the day. It provides better selectivity than the standard 455 kilohertz IF frequency that's found in most sets. We're going to let the radio and the generator warm up for about 20 minutes or so. I've realigned the tuning dial so it will be straight. And after that's done, this thing actually looks pretty accurate. So the alignment of this thing may be pretty close. Okay, we have the tuning condenser set to minimum capacity, aka top end of the dial. We have our signal generator grounded to the chassis as per the alignment instructions, and we're feeding the output of the signal generator through a 0.01 microfarad cap into the grid of the 1A7 oscillator and mixer tube. And as you can hear, we have a signal being heard in the speaker, so we'll continue to let it warm up, and then we will proceed with the alignment. We will tweak this one trimmer in the second IF transformer, and then the two trimmers in the first IF transformer for maximum output. And we'll keep our generator output as low as possible to get a usable reading. And I use my Grundig Yacht Boy receiver here that has a long wave band on it that will tune to 262 kilocycles to make sure our generator was on the correct frequency. The dial on my generator doesn't have a specific marking for 262, so just use the radio to dial it in. Okay, the second IF trimmer seems to be on target. As does that one. Okay, that one was a little off. Alright, so we'll turn our output down on the signal generator and go through and do them again. Alright, get in there, screwdriver. Alright, that takes care of the IF. Now they want us to radiate a signal into the radio and set the dial to 1400, which is really not practical in my case because we have a powerful station at 1390, so we're probably going to have to go to about 1500. Alright, we're set to 1500 and they want us to set all three of these trimmers for maximum. One is RF, one is intermediate. The one in the center is the oscillator, which determines the dial tracking. This thing seems to be pretty close. Now they want us to set it to 600, and there is a trimmer under the chassis that they want us to adjust, or actually I think you can access it from up here. And then once we get 600 dialed in, they want us to move back to 1500 and adjust our oscillator trimmer on the cap here and alternate back and forth until we get it right. Okay, now we have 600 set by adjusting that trimmer right here. And now we're going to move back to 1500 on our signal generator and on our receiver. And I'm using the radio to set the generator frequency because where I have it sitting, I really can't see the dial that well. So just using the radio for that. And then we'll set 1500 again and move back to 600 and alternate back and forth until we get it correct. And it looks like we're right on the money with no further adjustment needed. So we will turn off the signal generator and check our alignment against over-the-air broadcast stations. Okay, that'd be about 900. That'd be about 910. That's pretty close.
Included guys like Shaquille O'Neal and Pau Gasol.
So 1010. 1390.
LeBron has been more of a superstar
1450. That's pretty good. And that's 670. And that looks to be about the approximate correct place on the dial. So I think this thing's almost ready to go back in the cabinet. And that's the Yacht Boy tuned to 670, and it appears to be more sensitive than this radio, but our old tube radio is certainly no slouch. And I'm not getting anything on 1490, but it's after 5 o'clock, and I think they're daytime only. I think they probably go off the air at 5, so that's probably why we're not getting anything. Well, let's turn the light off and see. That could be part of the problem. Yeah, there's something there, so let's turn our tube radio back on and see if 1490 comes in. Hang on a second here. There's 1490 on the tube radio. Now, I think we got some thunderstorms brewing, so that's probably where all the noise is coming from. Let's turn on the Yacht Boy. Alright, the Yacht Boy is bringing it in, but not as good as on the tube set. In this case, the tube radio seems to be more sensitive at the high end of the band than the Yacht Boy is. But at the lower end of the band, the Yacht Boy is a bit more sensitive, but that's normal. That's the way this sometimes goes. Okay, now we're going to simulate battery operation with this set just to see if that function works. So we have our AC plug inserted into the receptacle on the back that switches it from AC to battery mode. We're getting our 90 volts from this old school battery eliminator here, and we're going to get our 9 volts that's required for the tube filaments from this Heathkit power supply here. Now this is an unregulated power supply, so the way you want to do it is connect your load to it, start out at 0 volts, and then crank it up until it reads about 9 volts on the meter there. And of course we'll have our B plus voltage source engaged too here. Okay, so we'll turn on our filament voltage, and then we'll crank it up.
The knowledge like this. The Big Ten, they'll get Notre Dame as well. They'll get a couple more
and it's
teams.
Working.
They'll get to the Big 20, and they'll rebrand as the Big 12. They're going to have 15 or 16 schools soon, and then they're going to say, okay, how do we want to finish this? How do we want to complete this? And they'll take a look.
It does sound pretty good, but it does not, like I explained earlier, it does not have the power or the tonal quality
will be the other,
than it has with the AC audio output stage, with the higher powered audio output stage.
And the SEC and the Big... Football's going to be and the Big Ten. The other schools that are left over, the Syracuses, the Pittsburghs, the Oregon State.
Get our meter and see what we're actually reading across here. Alright, I'm reading about 8.9 volts on the digital meter on our power supply. This meter indicates about 7.5 volts.
First of all, let me say this. I do feel...
Okay, so what happened? Did the thing just die on us or what? Okay, so what happened? We were playing and we just died. Well, it's not the audio that dropped out. It's not the audio. Did the oscillator drop out again? I think so. Yeah, I was in the process of telling you a story about whenever I was taking electronics in college. We had DC power supplies at each lab station. I think the one at where I worked was a B&K, and he always wanted us to use the Simpson 260 meters to take our readings. He got very upset if he walked by and saw you looking at the meter on the power supply. And I always made the mistake of looking at the meter on the power supply, and after 2 or 3 times of him calling my hand on it, he told me if he caught me doing it again, he was going to take some duct tape and cover the meter up to force me to use the Simpson 260, and I know now why he felt that way. Number one, he wanted the students to know how to read a multimeter, and number two, he knew the multimeter was probably a little bit more accurate than the built-in little cheesy meter in the power supply. Alright, so now we need to find out why the oscillator dropped out.
Former number
okay, I think it is probably a weak 1A7 tube, because I bumped the filament up just a little bit and boom, it popped back in. And I've seen that problem lots of times with these battery sets.
So my thought is this, big man, is
when the oscillator mixer tube gets a little bit weak, if that filament voltage drops below a certain point, it'll stop oscillating. Everything else will work, but the local oscillator won't. So
they should be asking for a boatload.
We're probably going to have to replace this 1A7 tube before too much longer. But the radio is working, and I think I can put it back in the cabinet and use it. Alright, I'm feeding the radio with 9.2 volts. The power supply says I'm feeding it with 8 volts. Let me drop it a little bit and see if the oscillator drops out.
Right? So when things like that happen, those are...
Yep. Let's see how much voltage we're feeding it with now. Alright, 8.3, and it's still dropped out. Alright, come on back up now. 9.1, we still have no action.
On the floor together, that makes...
There we are. Alright, 9.3 seems to be the minimum that the tube will conduct well enough to oscillate, so that tube is borderline, and I've got some new 1A7 somewhere. I've just got to find where I put them. I've got a whole box. Actually, I've got a couple of boxes of battery radio tubes, and I'm pretty sure there's some 1A7s in there. If not, they're cheap enough to procure. So I think we're fixing to put this son of a gun back together and use it until it dies, or until I dig up a 1A7 and then slap it in there and let it rip. I'm going to kill the B plus with the filament voltage still applied, and you can hear how long it takes the capacitors in the battery eliminator to discharge.
Plus 5 first-round draft picks.
Okay, there we go. Let's put this thing back together and use it. Okay, we're back together, and one thing I may have to do, and I don't know why they didn't do this from the factory, was cut a notch in the flap back here to have a place for the power cord to go through, unless they intended for you to leave it open during AC operation to allow ventilation for the rectifier and audio output tube. So I don't know, but let's fire it up one more time and give it a band scan, although we're not going to get much this time of day, and by the time it gets dark, it's supposed to be storming here, so we're not going to get much then either, but let's see. Okay, it's 9:10.
David Lloyd with the First Amendment Center spoke to News Nation.
It's 10:10, and our somewhat distant stations that we normally get in the daytime are probably off the air by now. We can already hear the interference from the approaching storm, so there's something distant.
.com.
Good evening, this is Joanna with your latest forecast on Meridian's Good News Gospel Station. For tonight, partly cloudy and likely thunderstorms, and a low of 76 with a 3 to 7 miles per hour wind out of the southwest. A variety of very light rain and some clouds tomorrow morning, a light breeze and very warm near 80.
Up with. Did you get Jason? Spikes down in time.
On WMER radio in Meridian, Mississippi. Has you covered. And we promote products made in the USA. Mid-South Welding Supply, Highway 11 by San Marcos, Monday through Friday, 7:30 to 5, 483-9331.
This is Meridian's news talk station, AM 1010, WMOX.
So are you going to jump on the trend, or are you...
That may be that 50,000 watt station out of Houston, Mississippi.
You'll be
right there.
You do.
You still have a good defense. You've got a very favorable division.
And when I replace the 1A7 tube, I may have to touch up the alignment, especially the local oscillator, because sometimes when you replace a tube, the characteristics of the replacement tube will be, even though they may only be slightly different, that's often all it takes to throw the alignment off a little bit, but we're not going to worry about that right now. As long as the radio plays,
no,
when I plug it into the AC outlet, we're not going to worry with it. But if I was going to sell this to somebody, I would go ahead and replace the 1A7 tube.
To be trending upward this year. Now how... Vision title.
There's another distant station. It came and went. Yeah, that is the little country station. They're still on the air, but there's so much atmospheric noise. There's not a lot I can get right now. And given the amount of noise, we're doing good to be picking that up at all.
Rush defense was freaking brutal last year. That matters. I know this isn't Russell Wilson's first rodeo, but it is his first rodeo with the Broncos.
Yeah.
All right, I realized there really wasn't much repair or troubleshooting to this. This was more of a get rid of the leaky caps, clean the tuning condenser, clean the volume control, align it, and let it go.
We've seen the last 2 years.
Right?
But I'm sure we'll have something in the future that will require more in-depth troubleshooting. But for right now, that's all I've got for this, and we'll be coming up with more stuff later.
To find out for sure.